Three Arctic wolves dug into a fresh grave in the frozen cemetery. The people who watched them claw through the frozen earth couldn't believe what they were seeing. But when those wolves finally reached the coffin and tore it open, everyone froze in absolute horror. Inside, the little girl was alive, her face covered in tears, her small hands desperately reaching up toward the winter sky. If stories of impossible bonds between humans and wild animals move you, hit that subscribe button on Arctic Wolf Legends. Drop a comment telling us what time you're watching this and from which city and country. We love connecting with viewers worldwide. Now, let me take you back to where this unbelievable story began. The winter of 2019 in northern Alaska was one of the harshest anyone could remember. Temperatures plunged to 40 degrees below zero. Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets that blanketed everything in sight. The wind howled through the forests with a ferocity that made even the strongest trees bend and crack. In this brutal, unforgiving landscape, survival was a daily battle, not just for humans, but for every living creature. Far from even the nearest town, deep in the wilds, he was struggling to survive. These weren't large packs, just a small family. 2 females and 1 male. The male, whom we'll call Silver because of his distinctive silver-white fur, was the leader of the pack. The 2 females, Ghost and Luna, were his mates. Together, they should have been a formidable hunting pack, but their small numbers made every hunt a gamble. Hunting large prey like deer or caribou with only 3 wolves was nearly impossible. Smaller prey like rabbits and ptarmigan were rare in the middle of winter. Day by day, they roamed the snow-covered forests, their stomachs empty, their strength waning. The day their lives changed forever was one of those hopeless days. Marcus Bennett was a wildlife ranger who had lived in Alaska for over 15 years. He was a man in his late 30s, tall and sturdy, with a thick beard that protected his face from the biting cold. Marcus knew these forests better than most people knew their own neighborhoods. He spent his days monitoring wildlife, checking on endangered species, and ensuring that poachers stayed away from protected areas. But more than anything, Marcus loved the animals. He respected them. He understood that in this harsh environment, humans were just visitors. The animals were the true residents. On this particular morning, Marcus was making his way through a dense section of forest about 10 miles from his cabin. He carried a backpack filled with supplies: rope, a first aid kit, a thermos of hot coffee, and several pieces of dried meat. The meat wasn't for him. Marcus often encountered injured or struggling animals during his patrols, and he always carried food to help them if he could. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked. His breath came out in thick clouds of vapor. The forest was eerily quiet. Too quiet. In winter, the silence could mean many things. Sometimes it meant a storm was coming. Other times, it meant predators were near. Marcus had learned to read these silences over the years, and today, something felt different. He stopped walking and stood perfectly still, listening. That's when he heard it, a low, almost inaudible sound. A rustling in the bushes about 50 feet ahead. Marcus's heart rate quickened, but he didn't panic. He'd encountered bears, moose, and wolves before. The key was to stay calm and assess the situation. Slowly, he reached into his backpack and pulled out a large piece of dried caribou meat. He held it in his gloved hand, ready for whatever might emerge from those bushes. And then, they appeared. 3 wolves emerged from behind the trees. Their white fur blended almost perfectly with the snow, making them look like ghosts emerging from the frozen landscape. But these were not healthy, strong wolves. Marcus could tell immediately that they were starving. Their ribs were visible through their fur. Their eyes, normally bright and alert, were dulled by hunger. Slowly, cautiously, they moved with their heads bowed. Silver, the male, was in front. He stared at Marcus with an intensity that made the ranger's hair stand on end. For a moment, neither man nor wolves moved. The forest held its breath. Most people would panic in this situation. They would run, scream, or reach for a weapon. But Marcus was not like most people. He understood the wolves' behavior. He knew these animals were helpless, yes, but he also knew they were intelligent. They were weighing their options. Was this human a threat, prey, or something else entirely? Marcus made his decision. Slowly, he crouched down and placed the large piece of caribou meat on the snow in front of him. Then, without taking his eyes off the wolves, he stood up and took 3 slow steps backward. "It's okay," he said softly. His voice was calm, almost soothing. "I know you're hungry. Take it. It's yours." The wolves didn't move at first. They watched him with suspicious eyes. Silver took one tentative step forward, then stopped. He sniffed the air, trying to determine if this was a trap. Marcus took another step back, giving them more space. "Go ahead," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Silver made his move. He darted forward, grabbed the meat in his jaws, and quickly retreated back to where Ghost and Luna waited. The 3 wolves tore into the food with a desperation that broke Marcus's heart. They weren't just hungry, they were starving. Marcus watched them eat, and a decision formed in his mind. These wolves needed help. They were too small a pack to survive the winter on their own. If he didn't do something, they would likely die before spring arrived. When the wolves finished eating, they looked at Marcus again. This time, something in their eyes had changed. The immediate desperation was gone, replaced by something else. Not quite trust, but perhaps the beginning of recognition. They seemed to understand that this human had helped them, not harmed them. Marcus slowly reached into his backpack and pulled out another piece of meat. He held it up so the wolves could see it, then placed it on the ground. "I'll be back tomorrow," he said. "Same time, same place, I promise." Then he turned and walked away, fighting every instinct that told him to look back. He could feel their eyes on him as he disappeared into the trees. True to his word, Marcus returned the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Each time, he brought food. Each time, the wolves were waiting. At first, they kept their distance, snatching the food and running away. But gradually, over days and then weeks, they began to relax around him. By the end of the first month, Silver would approach within 10 feet of Marcus. By the end of the second month, Ghost and Luna would do the same. Marcus never tried to touch them or push boundaries. He let them set the pace. During this time, Marcus learned to recognize each wolf's personality. Silver was the cautious leader, always alert, always protective of the females. Ghost, the smaller of the 2 females, was curious and playful despite their circumstances. Luna was the most skittish, always hanging back, always ready to flee. But slowly, even Luna began to trust. The breakthrough came on a particularly cold morning in late February. Marcus arrived at their meeting spot to find all 3 wolves waiting, as usual. But this time, when he placed the food down, Silver didn't immediately go for it. Instead, the wolf took several steps toward Marcus, his head low, his tail neither raised in aggression nor tucked in fear, just neutral. Marcus held his breath as Silver came closer. 10 feet, 8 feet, 5 feet, and then Silver was right in front of him, so close Marcus could see his breath in the cold air. The wolf looked up at him with those piercing blue eyes, and Marcus felt something pass between them. An understanding, a connection that transcended species. Slowly, carefully, Marcus extended his hand. He didn't reach out quickly or grab at the wolf. He simply held his hand out, palm down, letting Silver make the choice. Silver sniffed his glove. His cold nose touched Marcus's fingers. And then, to Marcus's amazement, Silver pressed his head against Marcus's hand. It was just for a second, but it was enough. The ice had been broken. From that day forward, the relationship deepened. Within weeks, Marcus could pet all 3 wolves. They would come to him eagerly, their tails wagging, their eyes bright. Ghost especially loved attention, pressing her body against Marcus's legs like a giant dog. Even Luna, the shy one, eventually allowed him to scratch behind her ears. Marcus knew he had to share this experience with someone. He had to share it with Sarah. Sarah Bennett was Marcus's wife, and she was every bit as passionate about animals as he was. She worked as a veterinary technician in the small town of Whiteridge, about 20 miles from their cabin. Sarah had grown up in Alaska, the daughter of a fisherman and a nurse. She was tough, practical, and completely in love with the wild beauty of their home state. When Marcus first told her about the wolves, Sarah was both excited and concerned. "Are you sure they're safe?" she asked that evening as they sat by the fire in their cabin. "As safe as wild animals can be," Marcus replied. "But Sarah, you have to see them. They're incredible. The bond we've formed. It's something I've never experienced before." Sarah looked at her husband's glowing face and smiled. She'd never seen him this animated about anything. "Okay," she said, "take me to meet them." The next day, Marcus brought Sarah to the forest. The wolves were wary at first, sensing a new human presence. But Marcus introduced them slowly, speaking to them in that calm voice they'd come to trust. He gave Sarah pieces of meat to offer them, and within an hour, Ghost was sniffing Sarah's hand. By the end of the visit, even Silver had accepted her. Sarah fell in love with the wolves instantly. "They're beautiful," she whispered, tears in her eyes as Ghost nuzzled against her. "I've never seen anything like this." From that point on, both Marcus and Sarah visited the wolves regularly. The winter slowly gave way to spring, and the wolves grew stronger and healthier. They were still wild, they still hunted and lived in the forest, but they had formed an undeniable bond with these two humans. And then, in the summer of that year, Sarah and Marcus received news that would change their lives forever. Sarah was pregnant. The couple had been trying to have a child for nearly 4 years. They'd faced disappointments, heartbreak, and moments when they wondered if it would ever happen. But now, finally, they were going to be parents. Marcus remembered the day Sarah told him. They were in their kitchen, the morning sun streaming through the windows. Sarah had taken a pregnancy test and came out of the bathroom with tears streaming down her face. For a moment, Marcus's heart sank, thinking it was more bad news. But then Sarah smiled, the biggest, most radiant smile he'd ever seen. "We're having a baby," she said. Marcus swept her up in his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. They held each other in that kitchen for a long time, barely able to believe their luck. But there was someone else they wanted to tell. Something else they wanted to do. "Let's tell the wolves," Sarah said suddenly. Marcus looked at her in surprise. "Tell the wolves?" "Why not?" Sarah laughed. "They're part of our family now. I want them to know." So they did. The next day, Marcus and Sarah went into the forest together. The 3 wolves greeted them as always, tails wagging, eyes bright. Marcus and Sarah sat down in the snow, and Sarah placed her hand on her still flat belly. "We're going to have a baby," Sarah said to the wolves, her voice full of joy. "We're going to be parents." Some people might think it was silly to talk to wild animals this way. Some might say animals don't understand human emotions or human language. But Marcus would swear, for the rest of his life, that those wolves understood. Silver's ears perked up. Ghost came over and gently pressed her nose against Sarah's stomach. Luna circled around them, her tail wagging faster than Marcus had ever seen. And then, all 3 wolves began to howl. It wasn't an aggressive or mournful howl. It was joyful, celebratory, a song that echoed through the forest and sent chills down Marcus and Sarah's spines. They sat in that forest for an hour, surrounded by the wolves, feeling more connected to nature and to each other than ever before. It was a moment frozen in time, perfect and pure. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Sarah continued working at the clinic through her first and second trimesters, only stopping when she became too uncomfortable in her third. Marcus continued his patrols, but shortened them so he could spend more time at home with Sarah. And whenever they could, they visited the wolves together. Finally, in early March of the following year, Sarah went into labor. Marcus drove her to the hospital in Whiteridge, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The labor lasted 14 hours, But at the end of it, they had a beautiful, healthy baby girl. They named her Emma. Emma Rose Bennett came into the world with a lusty cry that made the nurses laugh. She had Sarah's green eyes and Marcus's dark hair. She was perfect in every way. When they brought Emma home from the hospital a few days later, the cabin felt complete for the first time. The empty nursery they prepared was now filled with the sounds of a baby, crying, cooing, the soft rustle of her tiny movements in her crib. Marcus and Sarah were exhausted but euphoric. They'd finally achieved their dream of becoming parents. But there was still one more introduction to make. When Emma was 2 months old, Marcus and Sarah decided it was time to introduce her to the wolves. Some might call this reckless or dangerous, but Marcus and Sarah trusted these animals implicitly. They'd built a relationship over more than a year. They understood these wolves' temperaments and behaviors, and they wanted their daughter to grow up with the same love and respect for nature that they had. On a mild spring morning, they bundled Emma up in warm clothes and carried her into the forest. The wolves were waiting at their usual spot, and when they saw Marcus and Sarah approaching with the baby, their behavior changed immediately. They became cautious, their movements slow and deliberate. Silver approached first, his ears forward, his eyes fixed on the tiny bundle in Sarah's arms. "It's okay," Marcus said softly. "This is Emma. She's our daughter. She's part of our pack now." Silver came closer, his nose twitching as he took in Emma's scent. Emma, for her part, seemed completely unafraid. Her wide green eyes looked at the massive white wolf with curiosity rather than fear. Then Silver did something that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. He gently licked Emma's tiny hand. Ghost and Luna came forward next, equally gentle, equally curious. They sniffed the baby, their tails wagging slowly. And Emma, this tiny 2-month-old human, reached out her little hand and touched Ghost's nose. From that day forward, the wolves were part of Emma's life. As she grew from an infant into a toddler, Marcus and Sarah brought her to visit them regularly. The wolves were always gentle with her, always protective. When Emma started walking at 10 months old, the wolves would walk beside her, matching her slow, wobbly pace. When she laughed, they seemed to rejoice with her. By the time Emma was 2 years old, she could recognize each wolf by name. "Silver!" she would squeal when she saw the male wolf. "Ghost! Luna!" The wolves would respond to her voice, their ears perking up, their tails wagging. These visits became the highlight of Emma's week. Every Sunday, after they attended the small church in Whiteridge, the family would drive out to the forest and spend time with their wolf friends. Emma would bring little treats for them, dried meat that Marcus prepared, or sometimes pieces of her own lunch that she insisted on sharing. The years passed peacefully. Emma turned 3 years old in March. She was a bright, happy child, full of energy and laughter. She loved animals, especially the wolves. She would draw pictures of them with her crayons, tell stories about them to anyone who would listen. The wolves, now 6 years old, had grown even more magnificent. They were healthy and strong, their coats thick and pristine white. Silver had become a truly impressive animal, large and powerful. Ghost and Luna were equally beautiful, their movements graceful and sure. Everything seemed perfect. The family was happy, the wolves were thriving. Life in the Alaskan wilderness was hard, but it was also incredibly fulfilling. But then, in late April, everything changed. Emma woke up one morning complaining that her tummy hurt. Sarah, always cautious when it came to her daughter's health, took her temperature. It was slightly elevated, 99.5 degrees, but nothing alarming. She gave Emma some children's acetaminophen and kept her home from her preschool playgroup that day. By evening, Emma's fever had spiked to 102 degrees. She was crying, clutching her stomach, saying it hurt so badly. Sarah and Marcus looked at each other with growing concern. "Maybe it's just a stomach bug," Sarah said, but her voice was uncertain. That night, Emma vomited twice. She developed diarrhea. Her fever climbed to 103 degrees despite the medication. Marcus and Sarah took turns sitting with her, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, trying to keep her hydrated. By morning, Emma was worse, much worse. Her fever had reached 104.5 degrees. She was barely responsive, her skin pale and clammy. Her breathing was shallow and rapid. "We need to get her to the hospital," Marcus said, his voice tight with fear. "Right now." Sarah bundled Emma in blankets while Marcus started the truck. The drive to White Ridge Hospital normally took about 30 minutes, but Marcus made it in 20, speeding down the icy roads with his hazard lights flashing. When they burst through the emergency room doors with Emma in their arms, nurses immediately rushed to help. Emma was taken back to an examination room, and doctors descended on her quickly. Marcus and Sarah waited in the hallway, holding each other, praying silently. They could hear the doctors shouting orders, hear the beeping of machines, but they couldn't see what was happening. Finally, after what felt like hours but was really only 40 minutes, a doctor emerged. His name was Dr. Harrison, and Marcus and Sarah had met him a few times at community events. He was a good man, but his face now was grave. "We've stabilized her for now," Dr. Harrison said, "but I won't lie to you, she's very sick. We believe it's a severe gastrointestinal infection, possibly bacterial. We've started her on IV antibiotics and fluids. The next 24 hours will be critical." Marcus felt Sarah sag against him. "Can we see her?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "Of course. Follow me." They walked into the room where Emma lay in a hospital bed that seemed far too large for her small body. IVs were attached to her arms. Monitors beeped steadily, tracking her heart rate and oxygen levels. She looked so tiny, so fragile. Sarah rushed to her side, taking Emma's small hand in hers. "Mummy's here, baby," she whispered. "Daddy's here too. You're going to be okay." But Emma didn't respond. Her eyes were closed, her breathing labored. Marcus stood at the foot of the bed, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. He'd faced bears in the wild, survived winter storms that could kill a man in minutes, navigated treacherous terrain, but watching his daughter fight for her life, unable to do anything to help, this was a different kind of terror. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Marcus and Sarah refused to leave Emma's side. They took turns holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, telling her stories about the wolves and all the adventures they would have when she got better. Dr. Harrison came in every few hours to check on her. Each time, his expression grew more concerned. The antibiotics didn't seem to be working. Emma's fever remained dangerously high. Her blood pressure was dropping. Her organs were beginning to struggle under the strain of the infection. By midnight, Dr. Harrison called Marcus and Sarah into the hallway. His face was drawn, exhausted. "I need to be honest with you," he said quietly. "Emma isn't responding to treatment the way we hoped. We've tried 3 different antibiotics. We're doing everything we can to support her systems, but..." He paused, seeming to struggle with his next words. "You should prepare yourselves for the possibility that she might not make it through the night." Sarah's knees buckled. Marcus caught her, holding her up even as his own world shattered. "There has to be something else you can try," Marcus said, his voice desperate. "Anything." "We're doing everything medically possible," Dr. Harrison said. "I'm so sorry. I wish I had better news." They went back into Emma's room and sat on either side of her bed. Sarah laid her head on the mattress next to Emma's small body, her tears soaking the sheets. Marcus held Emma's hand, feeling how cold it was, how weak her pulse felt. "Don't leave us, Emma," Marcus whispered. "Please, baby girl, stay with us. The wolves are waiting for you. Silver and Ghost and Luna. They're waiting to see you again. You have to get better so we can visit them." But Emma didn't stir. Her breathing grew shallower. The monitor's beeping began to sound different, irregular, alarming. At 3:47 a.m., the monitors suddenly shrieked. Emma's heart rate plummeted. Doctors and nurses rushed into the room, pushing Marcus and Sarah aside. They worked frantically on Emma's small body, administering medications, performing CPR, shouting medical terms that Marcus and Sarah didn't understand. And then, at 4:02 a.m., Dr. Harrison stepped back from the bed. He looked at his watch, then at the other medical staff, and slowly shook his head. Time of death, 4:02 a.m., he said quietly. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Sarah let out a scream that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life, a sound of pure primal anguish. She tried to rush to Emma's bed, but a nurse gently held her back. "No," Sarah sobbed. "No, no, no! Not my baby! Please, not my baby!" Marcus stood frozen, unable to process what he'd just heard. Emma couldn't be dead. She was just 3 years old. She'd been playing in the forest with the wolves just a week ago. This couldn't be real. But it was real. Emma lay still on the hospital bed, the monitors now silent, her chest no longer rising and falling. Dr. Harrison approached them with tears in his own eyes. "I'm so deeply sorry for your loss," he said. "We did everything we could. Sometimes, despite our best efforts," his voice broke. "I'm just so sorry." The next hours passed in a blur. Paperwork, phone calls, arrangements. Marcus and Sarah moved through it all like zombies, going through the motions because they didn't know what else to do. They were allowed to see Emma one more time before her body was taken to the morgue. Sarah held her daughter's cold hand and sang her the lullaby she'd sung every night since Emma was born. Marcus kissed his daughter's forehead and whispered promises he knew he couldn't keep. Promises that everything would be okay, that they'd see her again someday. When they finally left the hospital, the sun was rising over the mountains. The world looked exactly the same as it had yesterday, but everything had changed. Their daughter was gone. Word spread quickly through Whiteridge. It was a small town, and everyone knew everyone. By noon, their cabin was filled with visitors, friends, neighbors, church members. People brought food that Marcus and Sarah couldn't eat. They offered condolences that couldn't ease the pain. They cried with the grieving parents, sharing their loss. The funeral was arranged for 3 days later. It would be held at the small cemetery on the outskirts of town, the same cemetery where many of Whiteridge's residents had been laid to rest over the years. The cemetery was located at the edge of the forest, a peaceful place where the trees stood as silent guardians over the dead. Those 3 days were the worst of Marcus and Sarah's lives. They went through Emma's room, touching her toys, her clothes, her drawings of the wolves that covered her walls. They called family members who lived outside Alaska. Sarah's mother flew in from Seattle. Marcus's brother drove up from Anchorage. On the morning of the funeral, the entire town showed up. The small church in Whiteridge couldn't hold everyone, so they went directly to the cemetery. Nearly 200 people gathered in the cold April morning to say goodbye to little Emma Bennett. Emma's tiny white coffin was carried by Marcus and 3 of his closest friends. Sarah walked behind, supported by her mother, barely able to stand. The pastor from their church led the service, speaking about Emma's bright spirit, her love for animals, her joy that had touched everyone who knew her. Marcus couldn't focus on the words. He kept thinking about Emma's laughter in the forest, her tiny hand holding his as they walked to visit the wolves. The way she would squeal with delight when Silver allowed her to pet him. All those moments were gone now. Nothing but memories that would fade with time. The coffin was lowered into the ground. People threw flowers onto it. The pastor said a final prayer. One by one, people approached Marcus and Sarah, offering final words of comfort before slowly dispersing. By early afternoon, only a few people remained. The cemetery caretaker, who would fill in the grave, and a handful of close friends who stayed to support Marcus and Sarah. "We should go home," Sarah's mother said gently. "You both need rest." Sarah nodded numbly. She took one last look at her daughter's grave, then turned away, unable to bear the sight any longer. They drove back to their cabin in silence. Inside, Sarah went straight to bed, emotionally and physically exhausted. Marcus sat in the living room, staring at nothing, his mind blank. 5 hours passed. Then Marcus's phone rang. It was John Hawthorne, the cemetery caretaker. "Marcus," John's voice was shaking, "you need to get back to the cemetery right now." "What? Why?" There are wolves here. 3 wolves. They're digging up Emma's grave." Marcus's blood ran cold. "What?" "I tried to stop them, but they won't let anyone near. They're aggressive. Marcus, one of them has already dug down several feet. You need to come now. Marcus hung up and ran to the bedroom. Sarah! Sarah, wake up! Sarah opened her eyes, confused and disoriented. What is it? The wolves are at the cemetery. They're digging up Emma's grave. For a moment, Sarah just stared at him, not comprehending. Then understanding dawned. Silver? Ghost and Luna? John didn't say, but who else could it be? We need to go, now. They rushed to the truck and sped toward the cemetery. Marcus's mind was racing. Why would the wolves be there? How did they even know where Emma was buried? The cemetery was miles from their usual territory in the forest. When they arrived, they found a crowd gathered at the edge of the cemetery. Marcus pushed through the people, Sarah right behind him, and there they were, Silver, Ghost, and Luna. Two of them, Silver and Ghost, were frantically digging at Emma's grave, their powerful paws throwing dirt in all directions. They'd already dug down several feet. Luna stood guard near them, her lips curled back in a snarl, warning anyone who came too close. Several men from town were there, including John and the town's sheriff, carrying rifles. Marcus, thank God, the sheriff said. We can't get them to stop. I don't want to shoot them, but... Don't shoot, Marcus shouted. These are the wolves Sarah and I have been caring for. There must be a reason they're doing this. A reason? John said incredulously. They're wild animals. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was watching Silver and Ghost dig with a desperation he'd never seen before. They weren't acting, randomly or out of aggression. They were focused, determined, as if they were on a mission. Let them dig, Marcus said. Are you crazy? Someone in the crowd shouted. They're desecrating your daughter's grave. Please, Sarah said, stepping forward. Trust us. Let them finish. The sheriff looked between Marcus and Sarah, then at the wolves. Finally, he lowered his rifle. Everyone stay back, he ordered the crowd. Let's see what happens. Silver and Ghost continued digging. The hole grew deeper and deeper. 6 feet, 7 feet. The wolves were completely focused on their task, ignoring everything around them. Dirt flew everywhere. Their white coats were now covered in brown earth. And then, Silver's paw hit something solid, the coffin. The wolves renewed their efforts, digging around the edges of the coffin, trying to find a way to open it. Marcus felt his heart pounding in his chest. Part of him wanted to stop this, wanted to preserve his daughter's resting place. But another part, the part that had learned to trust these animals over the past 2 years, kept him rooted in place. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Silver managed to get his claws under the edge of the coffin lid. He pulled. The lid, weakened by the wolves' digging, began to crack. Ghost joined him, and together they wrenched the lid partially open. And then everyone heard it. A sound that made time stop. A child's cry. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. Everyone stared at the grave in complete shock. Then Sarah screamed, "Emma!" She ran forward, not caring about Luna, who still stood guard, not caring about anything except that sound. Marcus was right behind her. They reached the grave and looked down into the coffin. There, inside, was Emma. Her face was covered in tears and dirt. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her small hands were reaching up toward the sky. She was crying, weak, hoarse cries from a voice that had been screaming for hours. She was alive. "Get her out!" Marcus shouted. "Someone help me get her out!" Several men rushed forward. They climbed down into the grave and carefully lifted the coffin out. Marcus tore the lid completely off and scooped Emma into his arms. She was cold. She was weak, but she was breathing. "Baby, baby, we're here," Sarah sobbed, reaching for her daughter. "Mummy's here. You're safe now." Emma's lips moved, but barely any sound came out. She'd been crying for help for hours, buried alive, and her voice was nearly gone. But her eyes, her beautiful green eyes, were open and aware. "Call an ambulance!" the sheriff shouted into his radio. "We need emergency medical at the cemetery immediately." The crowd erupted in chaos. People were crying, shouting, praying. Some were on their phones, calling others in town to tell them the impossible news. Children were asking their parents what was happening, but Marcus and Sarah only had eyes for their daughter. They held her, warming her with their bodies, whispering to her that everything was going to be okay. And the wolves, Silver, Ghost, and Luna, sat nearby watching. Their job was done. Their pack mate was safe. The ambulance arrived within 12 minutes, its sirens cutting through the shocked silence of the cemetery. 2 paramedics jumped out, rushing toward Marcus and Sarah with a stretcher and medical equipment. "Sir, we need to examine her," one of the paramedics said urgently, reaching for Emma. Marcus reluctantly handed his daughter over. The paramedics laid her on the stretcher and immediately began their assessment. They checked her vital signs, listened to her heart and lungs, examined her pupils, wrapped her in thermal blankets. "Heart rate elevated but stable," one paramedic called out. "Breathing shallow but regular. She's severely dehydrated and hypothermic. Body temperature is 94 degrees. We need to get her to the hospital immediately." "Is she going to be okay?" Sarah asked desperately, gripping the side of the stretcher. "We're doing everything we can, ma'am. The fact that she's conscious and aware is a very good sign, but we need to move now." They loaded Emma into the ambulance. Sarah climbed in without hesitation. Marcus started to follow, then stopped and turned back. Silver, Ghost, and Luna were still sitting there, covered in dirt, watching the scene. Their tongues hung out. From exertion, their eyes were tired, but they seemed calm now, content even. Marcus walked over to them. Several people in the crowd gasped, warning him to be careful, but Marcus ignored them. He knelt down in front of Silver and looked the wolf directly in the eyes. "You saved her," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking. "You saved our daughter. I don't know how you knew. I don't know how you found her, but you saved her life." Silver tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging the words. Then he did something Marcus had seen him do only a few times before. He licked Marcus's face. It was a gesture of affection, of pack bonding. Ghost and Luna came forward too, pressing their bodies against Marcus. For a moment, this man and these 3 wolves stood together, a family bound by something deeper than anyone could explain. "Marcus, we need to go," Sarah called from the ambulance. Marcus gave each wolf one final pat, then stood up. "Thank you," he said again. Then he ran to the ambulance and climbed inside. As the ambulance pulled away, Marcus looked out the back window. The 3 wolves were trotting back toward the forest, their white forms gradually disappearing among the trees. The crowd at the cemetery watched them go in stunned silence. The ride to White Ridge Hospital took 25 minutes. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness during the trip. When she was awake, she would reach for Sarah's hand and hold it weakly. She tried to speak several times, but her voice was too damaged from screaming. "Don't try to talk, baby," Sarah said softly, tears streaming down her face. "Save your strength. We're almost at the hospital." When they arrived, a full medical team was waiting. Emma was rushed into the emergency room, and once again, Marcus and Sarah found themselves in a waiting area, anxious and afraid. But this time was different. This time, their daughter was alive. Dr. Harrison was not on duty. It was his day off. But he was called in immediately when he heard what had happened. He arrived at the hospital within 30 minutes, his face pale with shock. When he saw Marcus and Sarah in the waiting area, he stopped dead in his tracks. "How?" he began, but couldn't finish the sentence. "She's alive," Marcus said simply. "The wolves dug her up. She was alive the whole time." Dr. Harrison sank into a chair as if his legs could no longer support him. "That's impossible," he whispered. "I checked her myself. There was no pulse, no breathing, no brain activity on the monitors. He looked at Marcus and Sarah with horror in his eyes. "I pronounced her dead." "Well, she's alive now," Sarah said, her voice sharp with anger and relief. "So maybe you should go in there and make sure she stays that way." Dr. Harrison nodded numbly and stood up. He walked toward the examination rooms like a man in a trance. The medical team worked on Emma for 3 hours. They rehydrated her through IVs, warmed her body temperature, treated her for shock and oxygen deprivation, examined her for any lasting damage from her ordeal. Finally, Dr. Catherine Winters, the hospital's chief physician, emerged. She was a woman in her 50s with grey hair and kind eyes. She'd been working in Alaska for over 20 years and had seen many strange things, but nothing quite like this. "Your daughter is going to be okay," she said immediately, knowing that was all Marcus and Sarah wanted to hear. "She's remarkably resilient. Her vital signs are stabilizing. She's warm, hydrated, and resting comfortably." Sarah burst into tears of relief. Marcus held her, his own eyes wet. "But I need to be honest with you about what happened," Dr. Winters continued. "We've reviewed all the medical records from 3 days ago. We've examined Emma thoroughly, and we believe there was a catastrophic medical error." "What kind of error?" Marcus asked. Dr. Winters took a deep breath. "Your daughter didn't die 3 days ago. She entered a state called profound hypothermic metabolic depression. It's extremely rare, especially in cases of infection. Her body temperature dropped so low and her metabolism slowed so much that her vital signs became almost undetectable. No pulse that we could find, no breathing that our equipment could measure, no brain activity on the monitors." "You mean she was in some kind of suspended animation?" Sarah asked. "In a manner of speaking, yes. It's the body's last-ditch survival mechanism. It happens sometimes in cases of severe hypothermia, which is why you occasionally hear stories about drowning victims being revived after being underwater in freezing water for extended periods. The phrase in emergency medicine is, "Nobody's dead until they're warm and dead." But Emma's case was unique because the hypothermia was caused by her infection, not by environmental exposure. Marcus felt his anger rising. "So, you buried our daughter alive because you didn't check thoroughly enough." Dr. Winters's face was grave. "Mr. Bennett, I understand your anger, and you're right to be angry. Standard protocol is to warm a patient before declaring death in cases involving hypothermia. That protocol was not followed. Dr. Harrison will be suspended pending a full investigation. The hospital is taking full responsibility for this error." "Suspended?" Sarah's voice was shrill. "He buried our daughter alive, and he's just suspended." "There will be criminal and civil investigations," Dr. Winters assured them. "The State Attorney General's office has already been notified. Dr. Harrison and everyone involved in Emma's care that day will be held accountable. I promise you that." Marcus wanted to be angrier. He wanted to scream and rage and demand justice. But Emma was alive. That was all that mattered right now. The rest could be dealt with later. "Can we see her?" he asked. "Of course, follow me." They walked down the sterile white hallways to Emma's room. When they entered, their daughter was lying in a hospital bed, awake and looking at them. She was pale and weak, with an IV in her small arm and monitor leads attached to her chest. But her eyes were bright and aware. "Mummy," Emma whispered in a hoarse voice. "Daddy." Sarah rushed to the bed and carefully gathered Emma into her arms. Marcus joined them, wrapping his arms around both his wife and daughter. The three of them held each other and cried, tears of relief, of joy, of gratitude for a miracle they still couldn't fully comprehend. "I was so scared," Emma whispered. "It was dark. I couldn't move. I screamed and screamed, but nobody came." "I know, baby," Sarah sobbed. "I'm so sorry. We didn't know." "But then I heard them," Emma continued. "The wolves. I heard Silver howling, and I knew they would come for me. I knew they would save me." Marcus felt chills run down his spine. "You heard them? Before they started digging?" Emma nodded weakly. "They were singing for me, like they did when you told them I was coming. They sang and sang, and then they found me." How was that possible? The wolves had been miles away in the forest. The cemetery was at the edge of town, far from their territory. How could Emma have heard them? And how could they have known she was there, buried alive? There were no rational explanations. But Marcus had stopped looking for rational explanations the moment he'd befriended 3 wild Arctic wolves. Some things simply transcended logic and science. Over the next few days, Emma remained in the hospital under careful observation. Her physical recovery was remarkable. Within 48 hours, her voice had returned to normal. Her strength came back quickly. The infection that had nearly killed her was completely gone. Apparently, the hypothermic state had actually helped her body fight it off. But the psychological effects were harder to measure. Emma had nightmares about being trapped in the dark. She didn't want to sleep in darkness anymore. She would wake up screaming, convinced she was still in the coffin. The hospital brought in a child psychologist, Dr. Rebecca Morgan, who specialized in trauma. She spent hours with Emma, using play therapy and art therapy to help her process what had happened. She's going to need ongoing support, Dr. Morgan told Marcus and Sarah. What she experienced was profoundly traumatic. But children are remarkably resilient. With proper care and support, she can recover from this. While Emma was in the hospital, the story broke in the media. It started with local news in Whiteridge, but within 24 hours it had gone national, then international. Miracle in Alaska. Wolves save girl buried alive. 3-year-old survives 5 hours in coffin. Arctic wolves dig up cemetery grave, rescue living child. The story captured the world's imagination. It had everything: a tragic medical error, a child's miraculous survival, and 3 heroic wolves who somehow knew to dig up a grave that everyone else believed held a dead body. News crews descended on Whiteridge. Reporters camped outside the hospital, hoping for interviews. Marcus and Sarah's cabin became surrounded by media vans and satellite trucks. The town, usually quiet and peaceful, was overrun with outsiders. Marcus and Sarah refused all interview requests. They released a single statement through the hospital's public relations department. "We are grateful beyond words that our daughter Emma is alive and recovering. We want to thank the medical team at Whiteridge Hospital for their care. We especially want to acknowledge the 3 Arctic wolves who saved Emma's life. These animals have been our friends for 2 years, and they proved themselves to be true family when we needed them most. We ask that our privacy be respected during this difficult time as we focus on Emma's recovery." But the media attention didn't stop. Reporters dug into the story, finding out about Marcus's work as a wildlife ranger, about how he'd first met the wolves, about the relationship the family had built with them. Some wildlife experts were interviewed, all expressing amazement at the wolves' behavior. "This is unprecedented," one expert said on camera. "Wolves don't typically form bonds this strong with humans, and they certainly don't have the cognitive ability to understand that a human has been buried and needs to be dug up. This goes against everything we know about wolf behavior." But other experts disagreed. "We've been underestimating animal intelligence for centuries," another expert argued. "Dogs can sense when their owners are about to have seizures. Elephants mourn their dead. Dolphins rescue drowning swimmers. Why couldn't wolves sense that a member of their pack, because that's clearly how they viewed Emma, was in danger and needed help?" The debate raged online and in academic circles. But for Marcus, Sarah, and Emma, none of it mattered. What mattered was that Emma was alive. A week after the cemetery incident, Emma was finally discharged from the hospital. Dr. Winters personally oversaw her release, reviewing her medical charts one final time. "She's made a full physical recovery," Dr. Winters said. "It's truly remarkable. Continue with Dr. Morgan for the psychological support and bring her back if any issues arise. But physically, she's completely healthy." "Thank you," Sarah said, shaking Dr. Winters' hand. "Thank you for taking care of her." "I just wish we'd taken proper care of her the first time," Dr. Winters said quietly. "Mrs. Bennett, Mr. Bennett, I want you to know that I've been practicing medicine for 30 years. This is the worst error I've ever seen in any hospital. We failed your daughter. We failed you, and I will do everything in my power to ensure nothing like this ever happens again." Marcus nodded. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but Dr. Winters hadn't been responsible for the initial error. She'd been the one to save Emma when she was brought back. She deserved their gratitude, not their anger. "We know you will," Marcus said. They took Emma home to their cabin. It was strange being back. The place looked the same, but everything felt different. Emma's room, which they'd been unable to enter for days, now needed to be put back together. All the funeral flowers that had filled the house needed to be thrown away. The casseroles and baked goods that neighbors had brought needed to be sorted through. But more than anything, they needed to see the wolves. "Can we visit Silver?" Emma asked on their second day home. "And Ghost and Luna?" Marcus and Sarah looked at each other. They'd been wondering the same thing. The wolves hadn't been seen since the cemetery. Marcus had gone back to their usual meeting spot in the forest twice, but the wolves hadn't appeared. "I don't know where they are, sweetheart," Marcus said honestly, "but we can look for them." The next morning, all three of them bundled up in warm clothes and drove out to the forest. They hiked to the clearing where Marcus had first met the wolves nearly 3 years ago. The clearing was empty. "Silver!" Emma called out, her small voice echoing through the trees. "Ghost! Luna! Where are you?" They waited. The wind rustled through the pines. Birds called in the distance. But no wolves appeared. Emma's face fell. "Why won't they come?" "Maybe they're hunting," Sarah suggested. "Or maybe they've moved to a different part of the forest." But Marcus wondered if there was another reason. Maybe the wolves had completed their mission. They'd saved Emma. Their pack mate was safe. Perhaps, in their understanding of the world, their job was done. They returned to the clearing every day for a week. Each time, Emma would call for the wolves. Each time, there was no response. And then, on the 8th day, as they were about to give up and head home, they heard it. A howl. It came from deeper in the forest, further than they'd ever ventured before. But it was unmistakable. Silver's howl, the one Marcus had learned to recognize over 2 years of visits. "It's them!" Emma squealed. She started running toward the sound before Marcus and Sarah could stop her. "Emma, wait!" Sarah called, chasing after her daughter. They ran through the forest following the sound of howling. The trees grew thicker. The snow was deeper here, untouched by human footsteps. This was true wilderness, the kind of place where humans were visitors, not residents. And then they burst into another clearing, one Marcus had never seen before. The 3 wolves were there, waiting. But they weren't alone. 4 small wolf pups tumbled around Ghost's feet, playing and yipping. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old, their fur still fluffy and their movements clumsy. Marcus and Sarah stopped in, their tracks stunned. Ghost had given birth. The wolves weren't avoiding them, they'd been protecting their newborns. Emma, however, had no hesitation. She walked right up to the wolves, her face glowing with joy. "Puppies," she said. "They had puppies." Ghost watched Emma approach, but there was no aggression in her posture. Instead, she gently nosed one of the pups toward Emma, as if offering an introduction. Emma knelt in the snow and carefully picked up the small pup. It was a female, with Ghost's distinctive markings. The pup licked Emma's face, and Emma giggled. The first genuine laugh Marcus had heard from his daughter since the ordeal. "She likes me," Emma said, looking up at her parents with shining eyes. Silver and Luna approached Marcus and Sarah. They'd lost weight, no doubt the stress of caring for new pups and the female who'd just given birth. But they looked healthy, and most importantly, happy. Marcus knelt down and embraced Silver, burying his face in the wolf's thick fur. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for saving her. I'll never forget what you did. Never." Silver's tail wagged slowly. He seemed to understand. Sarah sat in the snow next to Ghost, watching Emma play with the pups. "You're a mother now," she said to the wolf. "You understand what Marcus and I felt when we thought we'd lost her. You understand why we can never repay you." Ghost rested her head on Sarah's lap, accepting the gentle scratches behind her ears. They spent 2 hours in that clearing, playing with the wolves and their new pups. It felt like a healing, not just for Emma, but for all of them. The trauma of the past weeks began to feel a little less heavy. The nightmares seemed a little less terrifying. Life felt possible again. As the sun began to set and the temperature dropped, Marcus reluctantly said they needed to head home. "Can we come back tomorrow?" Emma asked. "Yes," Marcus promised. "We'll come back every day if you want." They did. Every single day, they returned to that clearing. They watched the pups grow. They helped the wolves by bringing them food during those critical early weeks when Ghost needed to stay close to her young. They became part of the pack in a way they'd never been before. Meanwhile, back in the human world, legal proceedings moved forward. The State Attorney General's office launched a full investigation into Emma's case. Dr. Harrison and 2 nurses who had been involved in declaring Emma dead were placed on administrative leave. Medical experts were brought in to review the case. Reports were written. Lawyers were consulted. 3 months after the cemetery incident, formal charges were filed. Dr. Harrison was charged with criminal negligence and medical malpractice. The hospital faced massive civil lawsuits from Marcus and Sarah. "We're not doing this for money," Marcus told their lawyer, a sharp woman named Jennifer Caldwell who specialized in medical malpractice. "We're doing this to make sure no other family goes through what we went through." "I understand," Jennifer said. "And I promise you, we're going to hold everyone responsible accountable." The case would take years to fully resolve. But for now, Marcus and Sarah had what mattered most. They had their daughter. She was alive, she was healing, and every day she grew stronger. The summer came to Alaska with its brief but glorious warmth. The snow melted from the lower elevations, revealing carpets of wildflowers. The days grew long, with the sun barely setting before rising again. For Marcus, Sarah, and Emma, it felt like a rebirth, not just of the season, but of their family. Emma's nightmares gradually became less frequent. Dr. Morgan continued her therapy sessions, and slowly, the little girl who had been trapped in darkness learned to trust the light again. She still slept with a lamp on in her room, and she still occasionally woke up crying for her parents. But the panic attacks stopped. The hyperventilation stopped. She was healing. The wolves and their pups became central to Emma's recovery. Almost every day, weather permitting, the family would hike to the clearing where Silver, Ghost, and Luna had made their den. The 4 pups, all healthy and growing rapidly, became Emma's constant source of joy. Emma named each of the pups. The largest male, who had Silver's confident demeanor, she called Storm. The smallest male, shy and cautious like Luna, became Shadow. The 2 females were named Snow and Star. Snow was adventurous and fearless, always wandering too far from Ghost and needing to be called back. Star was gentle and observant, often sitting beside Emma and watching her with intelligent eyes. "I think Star is my special friend," Emma told her parents one afternoon as they sat in the clearing. Star had her head rested on Emma's lap, while Emma gently stroked her fur. "She understands me." Sarah exchanged a glance with Marcus. There was something profound about watching their daughter bond with these wild animals. Emma seemed different around them, more peaceful, more centered. The trauma that haunted her in the human world seemed to fade when she was with the wolves. As summer progressed, the media attention gradually died down. The news crews left White Ridge and moved on to other stories. Life in the small Alaskan town slowly returned to normal, though people still whispered when they saw the Bennett family at church or in the grocery store. Some looked at them with sympathy, others with curiosity, a few with outright suspicion. Not everyone believed the story. Some townspeople thought it was exaggerated or even fabricated. "Wolves don't do that," Marcus overheard one man say at the hardware store. "It's not natural. Something else must have happened." But Marcus didn't care what people thought. He knew the truth. His daughter was alive because 3 Arctic wolves had done something extraordinary. That was all that mattered. The legal proceedings moved forward slowly. Dr. Harrison hired expensive lawyers who argued that the error was understandable given the unusual circumstances of Emma's condition. They brought in medical experts who testified that profound hypothermic metabolic depression was so rare that even experienced physicians could be fooled. But the prosecution had its own experts who argued that proper protocols had not been followed. Any competent physician knows you don't declare death in a hypothermic patient until they've been warmed, one expert testified. This was a fundamental error that should never have happened. The case became complicated. It dragged on for months. Marcus and Sarah attended hearing after hearing, reliving the trauma each time they had to testify. Emma, thankfully, was spared from having to appear in court due to her age. By the fall, a settlement was reached. Dr. Harrison would lose his medical license permanently. He would never practice medicine again. The hospital would pay the Bennett family a substantial sum, money that Marcus and Sarah immediately put into a trust fund for Emma's future and donated portions to medical education programs focused on preventing similar errors. "It's not about the money," Sarah told Jennifer Caldwell, their lawyer, on the day the settlement was finalized. "It never was." "I know," Jennifer said, "but sometimes the system requires financial consequences to force real change. The hospital has already implemented new protocols because of what happened to Emma. Every patient who presents with hypothermia-like symptoms is now subjected to warming protocols before any declaration of death. Your daughter's case will save lives." That thought brought Sarah some comfort. Emma's suffering hadn't been meaningless. Other families might be spared the same nightmare. As autumn painted the forests in brilliant reds and golds, Emma started preschool again. Marcus and Sarah had debated whether she was ready, whether the other children would treat her differently, whether the experience would trigger more trauma. But Dr. Morgan encouraged them to let Emma return to normal activities. "She needs to feel like a regular kid again," Dr. Morgan explained. "The longer she's isolated, the harder it will be for her to reintegrate." So, Emma went back to Little Sprouts preschool in White Ridge. The first day was difficult. The other children stared at her. Some of the parents pulled their kids aside and whispered to them, probably warning them not to ask Emma about what happened. The teachers were overly solicitous, watching Emma constantly for signs of distress. But Emma surprised everyone. She played with blocks. She painted pictures. She sang songs during music time. And when one brave little boy named Timothy asked her, "Is it true you were in a grave?" Emma simply nodded and said, "Yes, but the wolves saved me. They're my friends." Timothy's eyes went wide. "Real wolves?" "Arctic wolves. They're white and beautiful. I can show you a picture if you want." And just like that, Emma became the most popular kid in preschool. All the children wanted to hear about the wolves. Emma loved telling stories about Silver, Ghost, Luna, and the pups. She drew pictures of them. She acted out their rescue during playtime. The other parents were less comfortable with it. Some thought it was morbid. Others worried it would give their children nightmares. But the preschool director, a wise woman named Mrs. Patterson, defended Emma. "She's processing her trauma in a healthy way," Mrs. Patterson told concerned parents at a meeting. "The wolves represent safety and love to her. Let her talk about them. It's helping her heal." As winter approached again, the wolf pups had grown significantly. They were now about 6 months old, still young but no longer helpless. They'd learned to hunt small prey. They played rougher games. They were becoming real wolves. Emma noticed the change. "Storm doesn't play with me as much anymore," she said sadly one afternoon. "He wants to hunt with Silver instead." "That's natural, sweetheart," Marcus explained. "He's growing up. All the pups are. Soon they'll be adults themselves." "But they'll still be my friends, right?" Emma looked worried. "They won't forget me." "They'll never forget you," Sarah promised, though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. Wolves were wild animals. As the pups matured, their wild instincts might override the unusual bond they'd formed with humans. But Sarah's fears proved unfounded. Even as the pups grew, they remained gentle with Emma. Star, in particular, stayed close to the little girl during every visit. The young female wolf seemed to have appointed herself as Emma's guardian. One particularly cold December morning, something happened that would test the strength of the bond between the Bennett family and their wolf pack. Marcus, Sarah, and Emma had hiked to the clearing as usual. It was a Saturday, and snow was falling gently through the trees. The wolves were waiting, as they always were. But something was different. Silver was pacing nervously. Ghost was whining. Luna kept looking toward the eastern part of the forest and back at the humans. "Something's wrong," Marcus said immediately. He'd learned to read wolf body language over the years. They're agitated about something. As if to confirm his observation, Silver suddenly threw back his head and howled, a long, urgent sound that echoed through the forest. The other adult wolves joined him, creating a chorus that sent chills down Marcus's spine. "What are they doing?" Emma asked, frightened. Before Marcus could answer, Silver bounded over to him and grabbed his coat sleeve in his teeth, not aggressively but insistently. He pulled, trying to drag Marcus in a particular direction. "I think he wants us to follow him," Marcus said. "Marcus, is that safe?" Sarah asked nervously. "I don't know, but they've never acted like this before. Something's happening." The decision was made when Ghost came over to Emma and did the same thing, gently but firmly, guiding the little girl to follow. Even the pups seemed agitated, running in circles and yipping. "Okay," Marcus said. "We'll follow you. Lead the way." Silver released Marcus's sleeve and took off running through the forest. The other wolves followed. Marcus, Sarah, and Emma hurried after them, struggling to keep up. The wolves would run ahead, then stop and wait for the humans to catch up, then run again. They traveled deeper into the wilderness than the Bennetts had ever gone. The forest grew thicker. The snow was undisturbed by human footprints. This was pure wilderness, untouched and primal. After about 20 minutes of difficult hiking, they heard it, a sound that made Marcus's blood run cold. A child crying. "Is that?" Sarah began. "Another child," Marcus finished. His ranger instincts kicked in immediately. A lost child in this wilderness, in these temperatures, would die from hypothermia within hours. The wolves led them to a small ravine. At the bottom, partially obscured by snow and fallen logs, was a young boy. He looked to be about 7 or 8 years old. He was huddled against a rock, shivering violently, his lips blue with cold. "Oh my God," Sarah gasped. She started to scramble down the ravine, but Marcus stopped her. "Wait, let me go first. The footing is treacherous." Marcus carefully made his way down the steep slope. When he reached the boy, he immediately wrapped him in his own coat. "Hey buddy, my name is Marcus. What's your name?" Jake, the boy stuttered through chattering teeth. "I'm so cold." "I know. We're going to get you. Warm. Can you tell me what happened?" Through tears and shivers, Jake explained that he'd been out hiking with his uncle. They were visiting from Oregon and had wanted to see the real Alaska. But Jake had wandered off the trail chasing what he thought was a rabbit. He'd gotten lost and had been out here for at least 3 hours. 3 hours in sub-zero temperatures. The boy was lucky to be alive. Marcus lifted Jake and carefully carried him back up the ravine. Sarah immediately took off her own coat and wrapped it around the boy as well. Emma stood nearby, watching with wide eyes. "We need to get into the hospital immediately," Sarah said. "He's severely hypothermic." But they were miles from where they'd parked their truck. It would take at least 40 minutes to hike back, and the boy didn't have 40 minutes. Marcus pulled out his satellite phone, a device he always carried when in the wilderness. He dialed 911. "This is Marcus Bennett, wildlife ranger. I'm in the northern wilderness area, approximately 10 miles northeast of White Ridge. I have a child with severe hypothermia. We need immediate helicopter evacuation." The dispatcher asked for their exact coordinates. Marcus gave them using his phone's GPS. "How fast can you get here?" "We'll have a helicopter to your location within 15 minutes. Keep the child warm and conscious if possible." Marcus hung up and looked at Silver, who was sitting nearby watching the scene. The wolf had led them directly to this boy. How had he known Jake was here? The ravine was well hidden, the boy's cries barely audible. Yet somehow, Silver had known someone needed help. "Thank you," Marcus said to the wolf. "You did it again. You saved another life." Silver's ears perked up, and his tail wagged slightly. While they waited for the helicopter, Sarah used their emergency supplies to warm Jake. She wrapped him in a thermal blanket from Marcus's backpack. She gave him sips of warm water from a thermos. She kept him, talking to keep him conscious. Emma sat next to Jake, holding his hand. "The wolves found you," she told him. "They saved you. They saved me too." Jake looked at Emma through drooping eyelids. "The white wolves?" "Yes. They're heroes. They protect people." 13 minutes later, they heard the helicopter. It couldn't land in the dense forest, but it hovered above the clearing while a rescue basket was lowered. Paramedics descended on ropes. Jake was secured in the basket and lifted up. One of the paramedics stayed behind long enough to check on Marcus, Sarah, and Emma. "You saved his life," the paramedic said. "Another 30 minutes and we would have been too late." After the helicopter flew away, the forest fell silent again. The wolves had retreated during the commotion, but now they emerged from the trees. Silver approached Marcus and pressed his head against the ranger's leg. Marcus knelt down and embraced the wolf. "How do you do it?" he whispered. "How do you know when someone needs help?" Silver, of course, didn't answer. But Emma, standing nearby with Star at her side, said something that Marcus would remember forever. "They can hear hearts," Emma said simply. "When someone's heart is scared and crying, they hear it. That's how they found me in the grave. My heart was crying so loud." Sarah looked at her daughter in wonder. "Who told you that, sweetheart?" "Nobody told me. I just know. Star told me. Not with words, but I know." Marcus and Sarah exchanged glances. They didn't know what to make of Emma's claim, but after everything they'd witnessed, wolves digging up a grave, leading them to a lost child, who were they to say it wasn't possible? That evening, back at their cabin, they learned more about Jake. The local news reported that a boy from Oregon had been rescued from the wilderness after being lost for 3 hours. He was in stable condition at White Ridge Hospital and was expected to make a full recovery. His uncle, Richard Crane, gave an interview. "I don't know how they found him," he said, tears streaming down his face. "The wilderness is so vast. We've been searching for 2 hours with no luck. If those people and their wolves hadn't found Jake..." His voice broke. "They're heroes. All of them." The news story reignited media interest in the Bennett family and their relationship with the wolves. Once again, reporters descended on White Ridge. Once again, Marcus and Sarah had to issue statements declining interviews. But this time, something different happened. People from around the world began reaching out. Letters arrived at their cabin, hundreds of them. Emails flooded Marcus's work account. Messages poured in through social media. Some letters were from people thanking them for saving Jake. Others were from people who'd experienced similar bonds with wild animals. Some were from scientists and researchers wanting to study the wolves. Many were from people who simply found hope in the story, hope that there was still magic and goodness in the world. One letter in particular moved Sarah to tears. It was from a woman named Patricia Lynn in California. She wrote, "Dear Bennett family, I lost my daughter to leukemia 3 years ago. She was 6 years old. Since then, I've struggled to find meaning in life. Why do children suffer? Why do they die? Your story gave me something I haven't felt in a long time. Hope. Not hope that my daughter will come back, but hope that love transcends all boundaries. Hope that we're all connected in ways we don't understand. Hope that the universe has more magic than science can explain. Thank you for sharing your miracle with the world. It helped heal a broken mother's heart." Sarah read the letter aloud to Marcus and Emma that evening. When she finished, they sat in silence for a long moment. "We should write back," Emma said finally. "We should tell her that her daughter's love is still with her, like the wolves' love is with us." So they did. They wrote to Patricia, and they wrote to many others who had reached out. It became a kind of therapy for all of them, sharing their story, offering comfort, finding meaning in their experience. Winter deepened. Christmas came and went. Emma turned 4 years old in January. The anniversary of her death and resurrection approached, bringing with it complicated emotions. Dr. Morgan prepared them for it. Anniversary reactions are common in trauma survivors, she explained. Emma might experience heightened anxiety or nightmares as the date approaches. Just be patient and supportive. But Emma handled it better than expected. On the anniversary day, exactly 1 year since she'd been buried alive, the family hiked to the cemetery. They stood at Emma's grave, now filled in and marked with a simple headstone that read, Emma Rose Bennett, born March 15th, 2020, reborn April 29th, 2023. They'd chosen to leave the headstone as a reminder, not of death, but of resurrection, of second chances, of miracles. I don't remember much about being in there, Emma said, looking at the headstone. Just the dark and being scared. But I remember hearing Silver howl. I remember knowing they would save me. They did save you, Marcus said. They gave you back to us. Can we go see them now? Emma asked. I want to thank them again. They hiked to the clearing. The wolves were there, as always. The pups, now nearly a year old, were almost full grown. Storm had become as large as Silver. Snow was sleek and powerful. Shadow and Star were smaller but no less magnificent. Emma ran to Star, throwing her arms around the young wolf's neck. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for helping Silver save me. Star pressed her body against Emma, her tail wagging gently. As Marcus watched this scene, his daughter embracing a wolf that should have been wild, that should have seen humans as threats or prey, he marveled at the impossible bond that had formed. This wasn't supposed to happen. Wolves weren't supposed to dig up graves. They weren't supposed to lead humans to lost children. They weren't supposed to become family. But here they were. And Marcus knew, with absolute certainty, that this bond would last for the rest of their lives. Months passed. Spring returned once again to Alaska. Emma was thriving. She'd been accepted into kindergarten and was excited to start school in the fall. Her nightmares were rare now. She slept through most nights without incident. The wolves continued to thrive as well. Ghost gave birth to another litter, 3 pups this time. The pack was growing, becoming stronger. And then, one May morning, something extraordinary happened that would become the final chapter in this miraculous story. Marcus was at work, conducting a routine patrol in a different part of the forest, when he received an urgent call from Sarah. Marcus, you need to come home right now. Sarah's voice was shaking. What's wrong? Is Emma okay? Emma's fine, but Marcus, the wolves are at our cabin. All of them. They've never come here before. They're just sitting in our yard, waiting. Something's happening. Marcus drove home faster than he should have, his mind racing. The wolves had never approached their cabin. They'd always maintained their territory deep in the forest. Why would they come to human habitation now? When he arrived, he found exactly what Sarah had described. All 9 wolves, Silver, Ghost, Luna, and the 6 young ones, were sitting calmly in the Bennett's front yard. Emma was standing on the porch, talking to them softly. What do you think they want? Sarah asked as Marcus joined her. I don't know, but they're trying to tell us something. As if in response to Marcus's words, Silver stood up and walked to the edge of the yard. He looked back at the family, then walked a few more steps away. He stopped and looked back again. He wants us to follow him, Emma said with certainty. All of us. We need to go. This time they didn't hesitate. Marcus, Sarah, and Emma got into their truck and followed as the wolves led them through the forest roads. The wolves ran at a pace the truck could match, always staying just ahead, always looking back to make sure the family was following. They traveled for nearly 30 minutes, finally arriving at a part of the forest Marcus knew well. It was near where he'd first met the wolves 3 years ago. But the wolves didn't stop at their usual clearing. Instead, they led the family deeper, to a place none of them had been before. And there, in a small meadow surrounded by ancient pine trees, they found it. A female wolf, not one of theirs, lying injured on the ground. She was young, probably only 2 or 3 years old. Her left front leg was caught in a cruel trap, the kind that poachers set illegally. Blood stained the snow around her. She'd clearly been trapped for hours, maybe days. But that wasn't what made Marcus's heart stop. Next to the injured wolf, huddled against her for warmth, was a tiny wolf pup. It couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. Its eyes were barely open. It was crying weakly, undoubtedly hungry and cold. The mother wolf had been caught while hunting to feed her baby. She'd been lying here, trapped and dying, unable to help her pup. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. Marcus immediately went into ranger mode. He approached the trapped wolf slowly, speaking in calm tones. The animal was too weak to be aggressive. She simply looked at him with desperate, pleading eyes. "It's okay, girl," Marcus said softly. "I'm going to get you out of this." He examined the trap. It was an old-style leg trap, illegal in Alaska. The wolf's leg was badly damaged, but it might be salvageable if they could get her to a vet quickly. Marcus carefully pried the trap open. The wolf whimpered but didn't snap at him. She seemed to understand he was helping. Once free, the wolf tried to stand, but immediately collapsed. Her leg was too damaged. She wouldn't be able to walk, let alone hunt. Sarah was already on her phone, calling the Wildlife Rescue Center in Fairbanks. "Yes, we have an injured wolf. Female, young, severe leg trauma from an illegal trap. We also have an orphaned pup." She paused. "What?" "No, the pup isn't orphaned. The mother is alive, but she can't care for it." While Sarah coordinated the rescue, Emma did something that surprised everyone. She walked over to the tiny wolf pup and gently picked it up. The pup whimpered and nuzzled against her warmth. Star immediately came over, sniffing the pup with interest. The other young wolves gathered around Emma, forming a protective circle. "They brought us here to save her," Emma said, looking at the injured wolf, "just like they saved me. They knew we would help." Marcus knelt beside the injured wolf, examining her leg more closely. "You're right, Emma. They knew this wolf needed help, and they knew we were the ones who could provide it." The wildlife rescue helicopter arrived 40 minutes later. The injured wolf and her pup were carefully loaded onto a stretcher. The veterinary team said they'd do everything they could to save the mother's leg, but it would be a difficult surgery. "We'll keep you updated on her condition," the lead vet, Dr. Sandra Reeves, told Marcus. "You did good work here, Marcus. A few more hours and both of them would have died." As the helicopter flew away, Marcus turned to look at Silver and the rest of the pack. These wolves had just done something remarkable. They'd asked humans for help to save another wolf who wasn't even part of their pack. "You're building bridges," Marcus said to Silver, "between your world and ours, teaching us that we're not so different, that we can help each other." Silver's response was to howl, a long, triumphant sound that the other wolves joined. It echoed across the forest, a song of victory and hope. The injured wolf, whom the rescue center named Aurora, survived her surgery. Her leg was saved, though she would always walk with a limp. After 3 months of rehabilitation, she was released back into the wild. Remarkably, she was released near where Silver's pack lived, and even more remarkably, she was gradually accepted into the pack. Her pup, named Dawn by Emma, grew strong and healthy at the rescue center before also being released to join her mother and the Bennett pack. The story of how 9 wolves led humans to save another wolf and her pup went viral. Scientists from around the world began studying the pack, trying to understand this unprecedented behavior. Papers were published, documentaries were filmed, but for Marcus, Sarah, Emma, and their wolf family, none of the attention mattered. What mattered was the bond they'd formed, a bond that transcended species, that defied logic, that proved love and compassion existed in forms most people never imagined. Emma was now 5 years old. She'd started kindergarten and was thriving. The trauma of being buried alive was now a distant memory, overshadowed by all the love and miracles that had followed. She'd developed a special gift, an ability to connect with animals in ways that seemed almost supernatural. She wanted to be a wildlife veterinarian when she grew up. "So I can help animals like Star and Silver helped me." The Bennett family continued their weekly visits to the wolves. The pack continued to grow and thrive. And on quiet evenings, when the northern lights danced across the Alaskan sky, Marcus and Sarah would sit on their porch and reflect on how their lives had been transformed by 3 hungry wolves they'd met on a winter day 3 years ago. This story demonstrates the beautiful relationships that can develop between animals and humans when people strive to understand them and give them all the love and care they deserve. It shows that the bonds we form with the natural world can transcend all boundaries, even the boundary between life and death. If stories of incredible survival, impossible bonds, and miracles touch your heart, make sure you're subscribed to Arctic Wolf Legends. Share this story with someone who needs to believe in magic again. And remember, the universe is full of wonders we're only beginning to understand. The wolves of Alaska still roam free. The Bennett family still visits them. And somewhere in that vast wilderness, under the midnight sun and the northern lights, a bond exists that proves love knows no boundaries. Not between species, not between wild and tame, not even between life and death.